Last October, sunlight spilled through the leaded glass windows of Aunt Carol's Charleston mansion, casting shimmering patterns onto the spotless, white columns. I stood on the broad wraparound porch, my leather satchel weighing heavily against my hip, ears tuned to the sounds of laughter echoing through the window panes. My fingers smoothed over the lapel of my professorial blazer, checking for wrinkles that weren't there. A particularly loud peal of laughter made me hesitate, hand hovering over the brass doorbell. Inside, someone brought up Madison's name, followed closely by Aunt Carol's signature high-pitched social laugh, the one she reserved for accomplishments that truly impressed her. Before I could press the bell, the front door swung open. My mother stood there, dressed in a pearl gray cocktail dress, a champagne flute already poised in her hand. Her smile pinched ever so slightly when her gaze landed on me. "Charlotte." With a graceful yet dismissive gesture, she stepped aside, motioning me to enter. "You're late. Traffic on 195. I crossed the threshold into the foyer, the heady scent of gardenias and polished wood enveloping me like an elegant chokehold. "Everyone's in the parlor," my mother said as she turned away. "Madison was just telling us about her summer internship." Of course she was. I followed her down the hallway, past portraits of long-deceased Monroes, ancestors who, I was fairly certain, wouldn't have approved of me either. The quiet tap of my practical heels on the wooden floor was soon drowned out by the rising murmur of voices spilling from the parlor. And then the senior partner told me I had real potential. Madison's voice floated out clearly. "He thinks I could make junior partner by the time I'm 35. She paused when I stepped into the room, just for a heartbeat. Something flickered across her expression, but then Brian's arm tightened around her shoulders, and whatever it was disappeared. "Look who finally showed up," Brian announced, lifting his glass of scotch toward me. "The other Monroe. The one who ran off up north." A few relatives chuckled with polite restraint. Grandmother Margaret didn't even glance up from her needlepoint. "Charlotte teaches somewhere up north," Mother explained to cousin Sarah's newest husband, her voice inflected with the same dismissiveness one might use to describe a failing dog-walking service. "Now, Madison, do go on about that yacht party hosted by the senior partner." I lowered myself onto the edge of an antique settee, sliding my satchel discreetly underneath it. The latest issue of the Princeton Literary Review peeked out, my name nestled under the Distinguished Contributors section. I pushed it deeper out of sight. "Some of us are actually going places," Brian mock whispered to Uncle Robert, stage volume. "Not just teaching." The delicate chime of crystal flutes clinking in shared amusement followed. I thought of my apartment, dim and empty the night the Princeton letter arrived, how I had sat alone in silence, clutching that offer, fully aware that no one here would ever understand what it meant. "Isn't there something more impressive you could pursue?" Mother had asked when I shared the news. "With your credentials, surely a respectable law firm would hire you." A butler arrived with fresh drinks. I declined with a subtle shake of my head, my eyes settling on Madison, who effortlessly commanded attention from her position on the silk brocade sofa. She was dressed in a pale pink sheath, likely worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her diamond tennis bracelet glinted with every flick of her wrist. "Madison will be the first Monroe at Princeton since great-grandfather William," Grandmother Margaret declared to the room, finally lifting her eyes from her needlework. Her steely gray gaze swept past me like I was part of the decor. "Now that is a legacy to admire." A wave of approving murmurs followed. I thought of the faculty parking pass tucked inside my blazer pocket, and how Madison's eyes had widened with surprise when she saw me in the classroom doorway on the first day of the semester. "Dinner is served," Aunt Carol called from the entrance. She raised her glass and proclaimed, "A toast, first to our family's real Princeton star." Crystal glasses were lifted all around. Madison's smile flickered, just for a second, when her eyes met mine across the shimmering light. The family chimed in their agreement. I was directed to the far end of the long mahogany dining table, placed between Cousin Timothy's 7-year-old and the vacant chair the gardener sometimes occupied during holiday dinners. The divide between my seat and Madison's prominent position beside Grandmother Margaret could only be measured in social galaxies. "My literature professor is so intense," Madison remarked halfway through the soup course, her voice easily carrying down the table. She actually wants us to analyze the text instead of just enjoying it. I guess some people teach because they can't do. Don't let her dampen your spirit, dear, Grandmother Margaret interrupted, placing a hand on Madison's. Madison's gaze briefly caught mine over the flickering candlelight and delicate china, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a spark of recognition. Then Brian launched into yet another monologue about his newest business venture, something involving cryptocurrency and yacht timeshares. The moment dissolved like mist over Charleston Harbor at dawn. I remained quiet, watching my family bask in the glow of Madison's reflected glory, my thoughts returning to the paper waiting in my grading stack back at Princeton. Her name was written at the top, filled with shallow insights and inherited confidence. I had given it a failing grade. Aunt Carol's silver dessert cart jingled as it rolled across the hardwood, carrying an ornate creme brulee topped with fresh berries arranged in precise circles. The candlelight danced off the sugar crust, casting little diamond-like sparkles. Madison's favorite, Aunt Carol announced, stopping the cart between Grandmother Margaret and my cousin. She always requested this during her breaks from college. As Brian reached for the serving spoon, he added, "Speaking of college, have you started on those law school applications yet, sis? Dad always said you had the brain for it." The porcelain dessert plates clink softly as the butler places them on the polished mahogany table, each adorned with the Monroe family crest, its once bright gold leaf now dulled by time. I run a finger along the worn rim, recalling how Father used to spin tales about the courageous women in our lineage. "To Madison's brilliant future," Margaret says, raising her crystal goblet in a toast. The chandelier overhead scatters light across her pearl necklace, making it shimmer like a constellation in motion. Mother, cheeks flushed from her third glass of wine, radiates pride. "Not everyone can handle Princeton's rigor, but Madison was born for it," she declares. "Some of us are simply meant to achieve greatness." Uncle Robert's voice cuts in from further down the table as he swirls his brandy. "Others?" He pauses with deliberate weight. "They instruct the rest of the family." A ripple of laughter follows. A fork clinks sharply against fine bone china. Across the oriental rug, the butler's shoes make barely a sound. "Interesting," I say, more softly than intended, though the word slices cleanly through the amusement, like a letter opener gliding through thick parchment. "Because I'm Madison's professor." Silence falls instantly, as heavy and final as a leather-bound tome hitting the floor of an empty library. Cutlery halts mid-motion. Wine glasses linger, suspended near mouths. Mother's complexion pales, matching the pristine linen draped over the table. Brian's mouth gapes open, revealing a half-masticated bite of creme brulee. "What?" he sputters. Madison stares down at her plate, then exhales, a slow, controlled breath I recognize from her office hours, the same one she takes before presenting a complex thesis. "Professor Monroe," she begins, her voice steady, exactly as it was in last week's class. "She teaches literature and critical thinking, one of the required freshman courses," Grandmother Margaret says with a shaky hand, spilling red wine across the tablecloth in a bloom of crimson on white. "Charlotte, explain yourself." I carefully fold my napkin, aligning it with practiced precision. "I'm an associate professor in the comparative literature department. Madison enrolled in my section this semester." "And you didn't think to tell us?" Mother's voice rises, tinged with disbelief. I answer evenly, drawing on years of faculty decorum. "I uphold strict professional boundaries with all students, family included." Madison pushes her untouched dessert aside. "Professor Monroe gave me the first failing grade I've ever received," she says. "You what?" Brian slams his glass down, wine splashing over the rim. Her analysis lacked depth. I respond calmly, meeting his outraged glare. Like most early attempts by students who've never been challenged to think critically about literature. "You could have helped her more," another voice breaks in, strained. "Offered extra support." "She did," Madison interjects, sitting taller. "More than anyone else. She made me earn it. She made me work for once." "This is unacceptable," Uncle Robert snaps, rising from his chair, which screeches against the floor. "You used your position to make things harder for your own family?" "No," Madison says firmly, halting the room. "She made me better. She was the only one who did. Cousin Erica leans forward, the light catching on her reading glasses. I think it's commendable. Real teaching takes integrity. Madison looks around the table. I didn't even realize she was family until I saw her photo on the department website. She never once mentioned it. Uncle James catches my eye from the opposite end of the table. His small nod holds the weight of 3 decades spent teaching high school mathematics.
So,
Grandmother Margaret dabs at the wine stain with unsteady hands. I suppose we'll need to speak to the department chair about switching classes.
no.
Madison rises from her seat. The chair leg screeches against the hardwood, like fingernails dragged across silk. I'm not leaving Professor Monroe's class. In just 8 weeks, I've learned more than I ever did in 4 years of private education. Our mother reaches for Madison's arm. Think about what this means for your future. I am. Madison's voice is filled with the same quiet certainty she had when defending her midterm thesis. For the first time, I'm actually thinking, not just performing. Outside, the silence deepens. Dead leaves scrape across the panes of the leaded glass windows. The butler stands hesitantly in the doorway, unsure whether to begin clearing the untouched desserts. I fold my hands in my lap, feeling the steady rhythm of my pulse against the pearl ring my grandmother passed down, the one father gave me when I earned my doctorate. Madison's latest paper showed significant progress. She's beginning to shape a distinctive critical voice. And what about loyalty to the family? Brian always demands loyalty. Madison lets out a laugh devoid of humor. Like when you told everyone at the club that Charlotte had been rejected from Harvard Law, when she never even applied because she'd already been accepted into Columbia's PhD program. Mother's wine glass tips. Red wine seeps across the white linen, like blood in freshly fallen snow. The grandfather clock in the hall chimes 9, the sound reverberating through the hushed room. My thoughts drift to my office at Princeton, where Madison's most recent paper still waits in the grading pile. The one where her voice finally emerged. The one that earned her first A. I rise from the table, brushing down my blazer. Dessert is concluded. Madison, I'll see you in class on Monday. We'll be discussing Virginia Woolf's idea of anger as inheritance. As I move to exit, I catch her reflection in the window's dark glass. For the first time all evening, she's smiling. I drove home in silence. On the way, I thought about the first time I welcomed her during midterms. Her first paper had sat unopened on my desk for 3 days. The Monroe family crest hand-drawn in the upper corner reflected fluorescent light, casually precise, as though she'd practiced it over years of garden parties. Beneath the crest, 12 pages filled with polished charm and unearned confidence. I clicked open my red pen. That afternoon, after grades were posted, my office door creaked open. Madison stood in the doorway. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes, clinging tightly to the paper with my comments. Her hands trembled. Is this supposed to be a joke? Her voice cracked on the last word. A C-? I motioned to the chair across from me. Sit down, Madison. She sank into the leather chair, her pink cashmere sweater bunching at her shoulders. She dropped the paper on the desk between us with a dull thud. Your take on Woolf's stream of consciousness was shallow, at best. I pointed to the paragraph in question. You spent more time detailing her garden parties than analyzing her literary innovation. My high school teacher said I had a natural gift. A gift for what? Stating the obvious in flawless grammar? My tone came out sharper than I meant. I softened it. Madison, you can either ride your family name or actually learn something. The choice is yours.
She stared at me.
Really saw me, possibly for the first time since entering my classroom 3 weeks earlier. Recognition flickered behind her eyes. We're related.
Yes.
And that doesn't alter your grade or my expectations. My phone lit up on the desk, Mother's name flashing. I flipped it over. Madison sat up straighter, the familiar steel of the Monroe posture flashing through. I want to revise it. You have until Friday. She gathered her things and turned toward the door. Does the rest of the family know you're my professor?
No.
And I'd prefer to keep it that way. After she left, I opened her admissions file on my laptop. A perfect SAT score. Stellar letters of recommendation. A personal essay about resilience, how she overcame adversity, when her horse lost a dressage tournament. I shut the file and turned instead to my gradebook. A week later, the murmurs began in the faculty lounge. The Monroe girl. Professor Wilson's coffee cup tapped against the counter. Comes from a fine lineage, he remarked. It's unfortunate she's having trouble in your class. Everyone struggles in my class, I replied while stirring cream into my tea. That's the point. That's how they grow. The department chair had already mentioned possibly reevaluating grading standards. Wilson looked directly at me. For students like her, Princeton's immaculate white corridors could suddenly feel confining. That night, as I sat alone grading essays in my apartment, my phone buzzed. Madison's name appeared on the screen. I can't keep doing this, her voice cracked. My mother thinks I should transfer to a more sympathetic professor. Sympathetic how? I asked. That you're capable of more than anyone's demanded of you so far. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I told her, see you during office hours tomorrow. She came in the next morning, eyes ringed with exhaustion, a freshly rewritten paper in hand. Ink stains marked her designer bag, the fraying strap twisted where she'd gripped it anxiously. I wrote it 4 times, she said, laying the draft down. No trace of a family crest this time. I just kept hearing your voice in my head. Dig deeper. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. By the third, something in my chest began to uncoil. Real analysis. Genuine insight. A mind awakening. This, I thought, is what it means to write. Really? She asked, leaning forward, hope flickering through her fatigue. Yes, I said. Now tell me, what do you make of Wolf's manipulation of time in the dinner scene? Her eyes brightened. For the next hour, we combed through the text together, line by line. As she packed up to leave, she paused. I've never had to work this hard before, she said, twisting her bag strap. It feels different. Different in what way? I asked. Like I'm finally using my voice, not the one they trained me to use after she left. I placed her paper in my grading pile as autumn leaves drifted past the window. My phone buzzed again, another call from her mother. I ignored it. Word of Madison's transformation made its way through the freshman dorms. Soon, she wasn't the only one showing up during office hours. She brought others, students born into wealth, searching for their true voices beneath the weight of expectations. We started organizing study groups, discussion forums, spaces where surnames and family trees no longer held power. One particular assignment was especially challenging, a comparative analysis on modernist views of class. When I returned the essays, Madison's hands trembled as she flipped to the final page. A minus. She stared at it, then at me. I earned this, she said. Every word of it. That evening, I found a note slipped under my office door. Professor Monroe, for the first time in my life, I'm proud of something I created on my own. Thank you for looking past my name to the person I might become. I pinned her note next to the faculty committee's notice about my grading methods. Outside, the October wind shook the windows, ushering in the first signs of winter. Thanksgiving circled on my calendar like a storm on the horizon. But for now, in this calm office as twilight settled over the campus, I watched another young woman find her voice, not the one inherited, not the one prescribed, but her own. My desk phone lit up again, her mother's number flashing like an alarm. I let it go unanswered. The lights and familiar sights of my neighborhood slowly pulled me back into the present. I took a long shower, revised my lecture plans, and went to bed. As the days slipped by, our classes became increasingly engaging, and the students were starting to form their own ways of thinking critically. I felt a deep sense of pride in each of them, each in their own unique way. Now, nearly a month later, the photo remains on my Princeton office desk in its modest silver frame, tilted slightly to the left. It's from the Modernist Literature Symposium, Madison and me leaning toward the podium, where Joan Didion had delivered a talk on the importance of self-respect. I adjust the frame and turn my attention back to the pile of student essays in front of me. My phone vibrates. Another message from Madison. What if I changed my major to comparative literature? Economics feels empty now, like I'm just regurgitating someone else's conclusions. I placed the phone down without replying. Let her reflect on the question. Real choices need quiet. A knock disrupts the flow of my thoughts. Office hours aren't until 2. Without looking up from a paper on Virginia Woolf's stream of consciousness technique, I call out. "Not here for office hours," comes Brian's voice. I lift my head to see him in the doorway, wearing a sharp suit with the tags still peeking from the sleeve. His self-assured grin falters as his eyes scan my office, the shelves overflowing with books, the framed journal covers, the view of the historic quad through the window. "Nice view," he offers, aiming for nonchalance. "Better than that cubicle at William and Mary." "That was 12 years ago, Brian. What do you want?" He settles into the chair across from me, tugging at his tie. "Can a brother check on his sister? Mom's worried. Thinks you're all alone up here in the ivory tower." "I have 70 students and 4 grad assistants," I reply. "Alone is the last thing I am." He leans in, dropping his voice. "Speaking of students, Madison's talking about switching majors. All that time spent on economics gone. Her father's furious." I stack the papers neatly. Madison's an adult now. Her academic path is hers to choose. "Come on, Charlotte. We both know you've influenced her. Those study sessions, all those deep talks about literature." He gestures with practiced Southern ease. "Just ask her to be sensible. That's all we're saying." "Like you were sensible? How's the cryptocurrency venture going?" His expression hardens. "Some of us try to innovate, build things. Not everyone wants to spend life buried in books." My phone lights up once more. Another message from Madison. "Found my old high school journals." Every entry was what they wanted me to say. Nothing real. How did I not notice? I placed the phone face down. "I think we're done here, Brian. I have essays to review. Just consider the consequences. For the family. For Madison's future." He rises, adjusting his cuffs. "Oh, and Carol wanted me to formally invite you to Thanksgiving," Madison insisted. After he leaves, I check my inbox and see an email from the department chair. Subject: Commendation for Exceptional Mentorship Program. I delete it without opening. I don't need their validation. That evening, I make my usual monthly contribution to the First Generation Scholars Fund. It's not much, but as dependable as the sunrise. Then I turn my attention to Madison's latest paper, The Performance of Success, Artifice and Authenticity in Fitzgerald's Gatsby. My red pen hovers over the opening paragraph. Her thesis is solid, her voice confident. None of the shallow analysis that used to characterize her early drafts. I scribble excellent observation in the margin and catch myself smiling. The following morning arrives with a flood of notifications. Aunt Carol has tagged me in a Facebook post. "So proud of our 2 Princeton women. The Monroe legacy of excellence continues." I nearly spit out my coffee. Just 3 months ago, she had asked if I was still teaching at that community college up north. A text from my mother follows soon after. "Darling, what's your teaching schedule this semester? Thought I might drive up. See your classroom if you're not too busy." I silence my phone and pull up the submission guidelines for an academic journal. Madison's work on gender roles in 19th century sensation fiction shows real promise. It's time to officially list her as my research assistant. The days begin to blur into weeks. Madison skips the family's fall gathering to join me at a Victorian literature conference. Over hurried coffee catch-ups, Mother begins to ask cautiously about tenure-track jobs. Even my youngest cousins are now reaching out with questions about college applications. Then one night, Madison calls me, her voice quiet and vulnerable. "I'm not coming to Thanksgiving. I need to figure out who I am when they're not watching." I know, I tell her. "Will you go? Even though I won't be there?" I glance at the folder on my desk labeled Quiet Victories. Inside is Madison's first accepted journal paper, feedback from students she's helped at the Writing Center, notes of progress and growth. "Yes," I answer. "Some battles need witnesses." "They'll blame you for changing me," she whispers.
"No."
I run my finger along the folder's edge. "They'll blame me for helping you become who you really are. That's a very different thing." After we hang up, I file away her latest email, the one where she wrote, "I finally understand what you meant about the difference between a voice and an echo." I place the folder in my satchel, nestled between student essays and academic journals. Tomorrow, I'll drive down to Charleston, to the family table where I once sat in silence. But this time, I'll be bringing a different kind of legacy, one built not on appearances, but on truth. Not on inheritance, but on effort. This time, I come armed with evidence that sometimes the greatest victory is helping someone else find their own voice, even if their first real word is no. The next day, sunlight glints off the brass numerals on Aunt Carol's front door, 1842, Plantation Drive. The same door I've entered dozens of times, always with a knot in my stomach. Today, that knot feels even heavier. My department chair blazer from Princeton still smells of dry cleaning. In its inner pocket, a folded academic journal presses against my chest like a shield. Through the front window, I spot Madison's high school graduation photo displayed proudly on the mantel beside her framed Yale acceptance letter, despite the fact that she never enrolled. The cherrywood frame matches the one holding her Princeton acceptance letter, the one she received after she was already my student. Aunt Carol opens the door before I knock. Her expression shifts from a warm greeting to guarded calculation in a single breath. "Charlotte, how professional you look." The foyer smells of butter and sage, with a faint trace of Grandmother Margaret's Chanel No. 5 lingering in the air. Voices drift in from the formal living room, where Brian holds court by the fireplace. His latest startup pitch rises above the classical music Mother insists on playing every holiday. And that's why NFTs are the future of real estate, he declares to a circle of nodding relatives. Madison gets it. She's already invested. I place my leather folder on the sideboard, right between Mother's wedding china and the tarnished silver gravy boat no one's polished since the Kennedy administration. Inside the folder, Madison's publication lies in wait like a loaded weapon. "Charlotte," Aunt Cheryl calls sweetly. "How's the teaching going, dear? Still grading papers at that little college up north?" The room chuckles politely. Uncle Robert straightens the same bow tie he's worn every Thanksgiving since 1985. "Some of us work real jobs," he jokes. Cheryl adds, "Teaching's more of a calling, isn't that right, Charlotte?" Mother's fingers tighten around the stem of her wine glass. She glances at me, then at the room, lips pressed in that same thin line she wore when I declined law school. "Actually," I say, reaching for the folder, "I brought something to share." "Not another academic article," Brian groans, lifting his scotch in a mock toast. "We're here to celebrate Madison making something of herself, even if she couldn't be here." The leather folder opens with a faint crackle. The glossy journal cover catches light from Aunt Carol's ornate chandelier. I trace Madison's name on the page, then mine, listed beneath as her faculty advisor. "Madison is making something of herself," I say, my voice unwavering.
She earned this.
Really earned it. Grandmother Margaret's hand trembles slightly as she lifts the journal. Her reading glasses slide down her nose while she schemes the article. The room quiets until even the ticking of the grandfather clock becomes audible. "Madison nearly failed my class," I continue. The words hit like stones dropped into still water. "She wrote lovely sentences that said nothing. Relied on charm, not substance. Trusted her name to carry her, like it always had." Mother's glass clinks against her teeth. Brian's pitch evaporates mid-sentence. "But she learned," I say, stepping toward the fireplace, where her smiling photos watch over us. "She learned how to think, to question, to write something true." This publication isn't about her name. It begins with her thoughts. The quiet lingers. Then Cousin Erica, just barely 20 herself, starts applauding. The sound reverberates off Aunt Carol's ornate crown molding, spreading outward like ripples in water, until others begin to clap along. Grandmother Margaret runs her fingers over the raised lettering of the Princeton seal on the journal cover, her eyes peering just above her glasses. For the first time in 35 years, I catch a glimpse of something that resembles respect. "I should leave," I say, reaching for my coat. "I have an early class in the morning." My mother follows me onto the porch, her heels tapping softly on the painted wooden boards. The air carries the scent of firewood and the sharp promise of coming winter. She doesn't say a word, only draws me into an awkward hug, flavored by Chardonnay and all the conversations we've never dared to have. As I reach my car, my phone vibrates. Madison's message glows in the fading light. "They told me what you did. The heaviness in my stomach vanishes as I reply, "Good. Now go write something real." Behind me, light pours out through Aunt Carol's windows. Inside, my relatives pore over Madison's publication, finally recognizing her name, and possibly mine, with a clarity they've never had before. I start the engine and pull away from the house that once kept me confined, leaving behind the silence I've carried since I was a child, resting quietly on the pristine lawn. The department chair's blazer still holds the scent of dry cleaning, but now it carries something new, the sharp, honest fragrance of truth at last spoken. On the eve of the spring semester, the letterhead from Princeton's literature department shines beneath the glow of my desk lamp. "Professor Monroe, we are pleased to inform you of your nomination for Professor of the Year." My fingers trace the raised seal, recalling another document from months past. Madison's final paper, the one that proved change was possible. A knock on my office door draws me out of the memory.
Come in.
Madison walks in, the sunlight catching on her teaching assistant badge. Gone are the designer clothes and glittering tennis bracelets. She wears a simple black blazer and her grandmother's pearls, the only jewelry she now bears. The writing applications are ready for review. I motion toward the chair across from my desk, the same one where she once sat crying over her first C. "How many applicants this year?" I ask. 73, Madison replies, her smile lighting her eyes as she takes her seat. 3 of them are from Charleston. Word must have spread about your mentorship program for first-generation students. The irony is not lost on either of us. Just a year ago, my family wouldn't even acknowledge my profession. Now they're sending their children to study under me. My phone buzzes, my mother's weekly check-in. What began as stiff coffee catch-ups has gradually turned into something that almost resembles a real relationship. Just last week, she asked about my research for the first time in 15 years. "Did you see what grandmother wrote?" Madison pulls an envelope from her bag. Inside is a newspaper clipping featuring my latest academic article. In the margin, Grandmother Margaret's handwriting reads, "Brilliant analysis. Charlotte, we should discuss this over tea." She called last Tuesday, I say, placing the clipping beside my nomination letter. She asked if I'd consider giving a guest lecture at her literary society. Madison chuckles, without any trace of resentment. Hard to believe she once said people only teach because they can't do. Now she's basically your biggest fan. I return to reviewing the workshop applications and pause when I spot a familiar name. Brian's daughter submitted her application. He's now enrolled in community college courses. Madison leans in, a gentle expression on her face, and remarks that he finally appreciates what we've always seen in the value of education. The afternoon sun filters through the window of my office, casting golden light across the photographs on the wall. Gone are the staged family portraits with stiff smiles and empty accomplishments. In their place are candid images of graduation days, student projects, and one especially meaningful photo. It's Madison and me presenting our collaborative research at last month's academic conference. Mother placed her award in the living room for all to see. As Madison runs her fingers along the edge of my desk calendar, her touch lingers on next week's coffee date, penciled in with cousin Sarah's daughter, right beside the framed diploma of great-grandfather William from Princeton. The legacy of the old guard meets the spirit of the new. I reach into a drawer and pull out a folder labeled in crisp ink, holding what I call visible victories, letters from students whose lives shifted in this very room. At the top of the pile is Madison's, a paper still stained with the tears we both shed. She shifts in her seat, posture sharpening, voice steady. Her professor persona emerges. "I've been thinking about what comes after graduation," she says. I stay silent, giving her the space she now knows how to fill, no longer the rapid-fire charmer she once was, but someone who understands the power of a pause. "I want to teach," she says at last, her voice clear and assured, the same tone I've heard from my most dedicated students. "Not just as a TA," she clarifies. "I want to do what you do. Help people find their true voice, not just the voice their family expects." Outside, the setting sun bathes Princeton's Gothic towers in hues of promise. Through the glass, I glimpse students crossing the courtyard, a few waving to the well-known Professor Monroe and her equally well-known teaching assistant. I slide a newly printed brochure across the desk, still warm to the touch. It's for the Monroe Educational Legacy Grant, a scholarship for future educators. Madison inhales sharply when she reads the title. 2 names are listed as program directors: Charlotte Monroe, Ph.D., and Madison Monroe, M.A. candidate. "You're reshaping the family legacy," she whispers, fingers tracing our names. "Not just for us, but for everyone who comes next." Tomorrow, I'll stand in front of a fresh lecture hall of students, including 3 young Monroes who chose literature at Princeton over the traditional family path of law school. The holiday cards we receive now no longer disguise judgment, but instead include genuine curiosity about reading recommendations, course materials, and teaching approaches. We're transforming this together. I add Madison's latest teaching evaluations to the Visible Victories folder. Her students speak of how she sees beyond their rehearsed personas to the genuine voices underneath. As evening settles and the campus lights flicker on, Madison gathers her materials, a yellow legal pad packed with notes for tomorrow's first-year seminar. At the door, she hesitates. Her voice is quiet, yet filled with the gravity of a revelation. "You didn't just teach me literature," she says. "You taught me it's okay to be who you are, not who others expect you to be." I watch her cross the courtyard, her silhouette blending with the deepening twilight beyond the stained glass window. Our reflections intersect, mentor and mentee, present and future, 2 Monroe women who chose to author their own narratives. A message appears on my phone screen. It's from Mother. "She's discovered your old journals in the attic again. You were always meant to be a teacher. Even back then, we just weren't ready to recognize it." I return my attention to the stack of workshop applications before me, each one representing an opportunity to carry forward this legacy of genuine accomplishment. Nearby, the Professor of the Year nomination letter catches the fading light of the day, not as a desperate bid for validation anymore, but as a marker on a path I was always destined to walk. Success isn't defined by family approval or society's standards, Paige says. It lives in those quiet moments of acknowledgement, in the bravery to speak truth when silence fills the room, in the strength to help others discover their voice, even when your own has been ignored. I gently placed Madison's teaching evaluation into the folder labeled Visible Victories and closed my office door. Tomorrow offers another opportunity to show that the most resounding applause often comes from the least expected places, and that sometimes the most powerful legacy is having the courage to shape your own.